Hello and welcome to this continuing first look exploring session looking at the Alexandrian Tragedy by Sir William Alexander. We are in our second session, so we're going from Act 3, Scene 2 onwards as we get to grips with this interesting text. I mean, it's a very long text, it's a very wordy text. It's full of lots of long speeches, but it is when it's on form, it comes out with some really nice lines, some really nice speeches and set pieces. Structurally, it's dancing around quite a lot. Alexander the Great's dead. There is some chaos ensuing, and the play is sort of feeding into that chaos energy, I think, by the way it's zooming in on different aspects of the chaos that follows Alexander's death. Just because he's dead, of course, doesn't mean he can't pop in and make a guest star appearance, which is what he did last time. That's the great advantage of ghosts, is that, you always get the last word. I don't know if he gets the last word. I don't know if he turns up at the end. He probably doesn't. Anyway, to continue our journey through the unravelling of everything that Alexander did, reading Olympias and Lysimachus is...
Hi, my name's Desna. I'm from Lancaster.
Reading Roxane or Roxane, Eumedes and Phocion is...
Hello, I'm Emma Kemp. I'm an actor in London.
Reading Chorus and Cassander is...
Liza Graham, also in London, also an actor.
And reading Antigonus and Aristotle is...
Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm not in London, and I'm not sure I'm an actor anymore, or yet. I don't know. I'm confused.
Indeed.
It's complicated.
As are we all, I'm sure. As we continue our diving into the text, I'm your host, Robert Crighton. I say I'd be reading stage directions. I'll occasionally remind you that there's an act structure. That's pretty much what I get to do. So, without further ado, we return to Act 3. We started Act 3 with Perdiccas, who has sort of been as close to a protagonist kind of figure in the play so far. A lot of discussion has been aimed at him, been in a couple of scenes, seemed quite important as one of the leading people trying to wrestle control over the kingdom. And we just left a lengthy scene about how far he's willing to go to gain and retain power, and what his next moves are going to be. We shift our focus in Act 3, Scene 2 to the holders of the torch of Alexander, Alexander's mother, Olympias, and his wife, Roxane. And we're going to see what happens there. So, Olympias speaks first.
Let sorrow prove a tyrant to my soul, whose rage with reason now no measure keeps. What of my tears the torrent can control, since flowing from affliction's deepest deeps? How can my breast but burst while sobs rebound, since once the seat of joy is now not the same? May not huge horrors press me to the ground, thinking what I was and what I am? I was a great man's wife, a greater's mother, even she to whom the heavens their best did give. Yet I, even I, more plagued than any other, in dungeons now of desolation live. My son, who was the glory of his time, stain of times past and light of times to come. Oh, frail mortality, oh, slippery slime, though having all o'ercome, death did o'ercome. And I, dejected wretch, whose dying eyes, by nature's custom bound, he should have closed, was not to shut his stars with divers skies, which curtained once where majesty reposed. But, his falling in a foreign part hath, if aught can enlarged my grief, or else on him I melted had my heart, and spent myself to purchase his relief. Yet though I was not present at his death, he shall not be defrauded of my tears, but for his funeral fires my flaming breath shall smoke, and to his ghost a tribute bears.
Ah, to what corner rolls my watery sight, where it not finds some matter to bemoan? Ah, foolish eyes, why lose ye not your light, since your delight is lost, your object gone? Once of all queens, I might the fortune scorn, to whom just love that great man did engage, whose match in worth the world hath never borne, nor never shall enrich another age. When those perfections do transport my mind, which admiration doth disclose too late, I curse the fate that did his judgment bind, to make me partner of so high estate. And I repent that to his sight I passed, though highly graced, once on a festal day, a feast which many a time must make me fast, and with slow woe that flying mirth defray. Then, if my fortune had not blinded me, but whose judgment had it not bereaved? Whilst that great monarch deigned to like of me, of my high flight I had the fall conceived. Of Asia's prince, whose state did then decline, he both the wife and daughters had at will, whose beauty's lustre might have darkened mine, yet free from snares restrained his fancies still. And when my father chose out from the rest those virgins all whose fame affirmed for rare, though having viewed them all, he loved me best, then thought most fortunate, if not most fair. And when this match his nobles all dismayed, that he himself with captives had allied, that act he then, as love had dighted, said, took from the vanquished shame, from victor's pride. Yet me as empress all did entertain, though his inferior far in all respects, till I from him by death divorced remain, whom with his son now all the world neglects.
Although this will but aggravate my woe, from whom the fates all comfort now seclude, yet I do tender his remembrance so, that of my son to hear, it doth me good. And, daughter, now to double my distress, make me at length acquainted with his death. Sorrow may each part of me possess, sad news mine ears, tears eyes, and sighs my breath.
Though grief to me scarce liberty affords to press forth passions which oppress my mind, yet would affection wrestle out some words to speak of him who all my thoughts confined. When he had conquered all that could resist, a monarchy not equal with his mind, still in his haughty course he did insist, and searched the ocean other worlds to find. But when from it his navy was redeemed, he stood in doubt where trophies next to rear. The world, though large, for him too little seemed. His mind could more conceive than nature bear. Last, this emperor purposed was in the end at Babylon his glory heights to show, where all the world his coming did attend, as Jove above, who only reigned below. When he drew near that then thrice monarch's seat, the astrologers by their skill foretold what danger huge was threatened to his state, the which elsewhere might better be controlled. But he, who was not capable of fear, and could not muse of misadventures then, would triumph there, and the world's sceptre bear, backed with more kings than other kings with men, there, as a god, transporting mortal sights, which mirth with mourning I must still record. He spent, or lost, a time in all delights, which fortune could, when flattering most, afford, till Thessalus, for mischief but reserved, once to his house invited him to dine, where false Cassander at the table served, and, as he used, with water mixed his wine.
Alas, alas! And so it proved in the end. But who could fear a benefited friend?
There were all creatures valued for their worth, as wholesome, dainty, sumptuous, stately, rare, which, forced by Phoebus, the eastern realms bring forth to live by sea, by land, or in the air. Then, when that reason drunk with pleasure slept, which all the senses with abundance stored, and whilst, save music, nothing measure kept, with Ceres, Bacchus only was adored, even when the king beginning was to drink. As strangely moved, he thundered forth a groan, and from the table suddenly did shrink, his wonted vigour in an instant gone. Whilst he was softly to a chamber led, that death a title to his body claimed. The sorrowing soldiers swarmed about his bed, with looks once fierce, then for compassion framed. But he, whom victory had still arrayed, with others past, this battle bent to even, did look like one whom all the world obeyed, and boasted shortly then to take for heaven. Whilst, lightening comfort to afflicted bands, he stretched them forth to kiss in several parts, by sword, then sceptre his more honoured hands, on which it seemed they melted all their hearts. Last, unto them, those generous words he told. Yet to my life my death doth bring no blot, thus to die young in years, in glory old, of all our family is still the lot. And since no worlds are resting to o'ercome, life serves for naught. I did an empire found, lived, warred, and reigned, all done, for which I come, then go, great ghost, not grieved, below the ground. No further weighing what belonged to life. He with a countenance constant even in death, as too victorious in that fatal strife, the air perfuming spent the imperious breath. But through the camp, when that it once was known, that from the world, that world of worth was gone, what anguish was, it cannot well be shown. I had my part, yet had not all alone. Ah, let that day which makes my days all night be registered amongst the dismal days, whose melancholy and portentous light with some disaster still the world dismays. And Babylon, cursed be thy fatal towers, once seat of monarchs, mistress of the earth, but from henceforth a slave to foreign powers, still burdened be thy bounds with blood and death.
You need not use those execrations more. Though Babylon of breath that prince deprived, yet, as an oracle had told before, in Macedonia was his death contrived. Antipater had heard how divers times the king against him had been moved to wrath, and damned as guilty of opprobrious crimes, his son-in-law Lysimachus unto death. Then he was told the king did strictly try how his lieutenants had their places used, still making all as traitors straight to die, who had the same in any sort abused. Thus, he who well did know his own misdeeds had learned by others what he might expect, as whose ambitious breast in pride exceeds, and always did a sovereignty affect. But when Craterus was to have his place, he required the army to attend. He thought that thus time would some means embrace to plague his pride with a deserved end. Then to prevent that which I think was still more feared by him than purposed by the king, with guilty thoughts oft exercised in ill, he sought what might to death his sovereign bring. And this the traitor compassed at the last, as I, alas, have learned, although too late. When to my son, his son Cassander passed as to congratulate his prosperous state, then in his company he did retain a poison powerful where it was employed, whose violence no metal could restrain, but in a horse's hoof was still conveyed. He and his brother fit occasion watched, and for their prince a cup of poison made. Thus he who never could by force be matched, by treason low, O cruel fate, lies dead.
And could or durst those traitors be so bold, the pillar of all works to undermine? But, madame, Antipater of old, against your greatness always did repine. And I remember on a time he sent a messenger of mine to make you bow, who to your son a letter did present, full of invectives to discredit you, The king, whilst reading what it did comprise, did smile with scorn, then to Hephaestion say, in writing of such things he is not wise, which straight one mother's tear will wipe away.
I often formed my son, strange ways devised, how that disloyal man strived to be great, but as a woman's wit mine was despised, and construed still unto the sense of hate. Yet of my son, I thought, the deeds were such, that all men of them admired, none envy could, and that none durst his sacred person touch, whom men adored, and love as his did hold. How oft have I those bitter throes allowed, by which I brought that demigod to light? And well I might of such a birth be proud, which made me glorious in the people's sight. Though diverse too, as I have sometime known, to draw his love from me did ways prepare. Yet were there slights by duteous love o'erthrown, and I respected with a reverent care. His tender love to me was much extolled. Then when he sought to establish a decree, that with immortals I might be enrolled, and as a goddess honours have to me, how can I this tragic time survive, who lost a son so great, a son so kind, and all the means which make me now to live is with revenge a hope to ease my mind.
His love to you, it could not but abound. By nature, parents of their own are loved, since those to whom he by no band was bound, of his humanity the fruits have proved. His clemency did make his state more sure than all the terrors rising from his name, which whilst he lived did public love procure, and after death a never dying fame. Old Sisygambes lifting up her heart, of her own sons the death who had survived, to Alexander did that love impart, which was to Darius due while as he lived. But when these tidings wounded had her ears, that heaven from the earth had robbed that praise of men, whilst all dissolved in floods of bitter tears, she hated life, as never spoiled till then. Her widowed nephew groaning at her feet, who of Hephaestion did the death bewail, in depths of woe she, drowned with tears, did fleet, till that overwhelmed her strength began to fail. Then barred from food, she grovelling did abide, till that life's course, then hastened fast, was run. Thus she survived her son, yet with him died, in whom she found the kindness of a son.
If but when hearing this his tragic end, a stranger, once his captive, died for grief, shall his mother yet on hope depend, as such a loss might look for some relief? And yet I will, for 'twere a great disgrace to me, the mother of that matchless man, like other women, to give fortune place and faintly yield as vulgar wretches can. Though grief at first must mollify me once, or, as unnatural, I might be admired, yet will I not still burst my breast with groans, than that of me more courage is required. I'll not degener from my generous kind, faint-hearted hinds brought never lion forth, nor yet a mother of an abject mind had ever borne a monarch of such worth. And oh, who knows but once the time may come that I to venge myself a means may have, whilst those vile traitors ruined are by some, who with their blood may bathe their sovereign's grave. Now on Perdiccas I repose my trust, who with Eumedes would our wrongs redress. Their valour, venturing in a cause so just, by all appearance promise doth no less.
Lo, now of late delivered of a son, I to those captains scarce dare make it known, his kingdoms all to part who have begun, and might, by killing him, make them their own. Oh, madam, this doth move me most to pause. Who of those great men the ambition fear, lest by pretending but a public cause they seek themselves the diadem to bear? Thus they of my young babe, fraud masking wrath, would be but tutors first, and traitors then, far from obedience, duty, love, or faith. no things more dear than diadems to men.
As those whose courage cannot be dismayed, let us now strive what way are forced to find. And whilst that pity doth procure for aid, the people's passions tune unto our mind. If that their love not vanished with his life, of Alexander in a high degree, I think the son, the mother, and the wife by Macedonians still must reverenced be. And this doth with disdain my soul consume, that Aridaeus, amongst other wrongs, and proud Eurydice, his wife, presume to take the honour which to us belongs. Oh, they shall find my fortune not so changed, but I am able yet to curb their pride. What? Olympias must be revenged, and, save herself, no queen she can abide.
And exits. I was going to pause in the middle of that, but it was rattling along rather nicely. There's, we start with I am sad, I too am sad. But then it sort of gets into something a bit meatier. Tell me of his death, you were there. And we get the backstory and, down with Babylon. And I warned him, he didn't listen, not to trust these people. And then we get sort of towards the end, we get a bit of politics. I'm going to stick with Perdiccas, I repose my trust. And the son's been born. So we get, time has moved on, because there was a part of me at the very beginning going, oh, this is very movable. We could use bits of this elsewhere. And because I was thinking about how we might leaven out the text a little bit so that it's not quite so massive scene. But actually, this is actually quite nicely structured. It reminds us that things have moved on since the last scene. It fits quite nicely in Act 3 for those who weren't here for the last session of Act 3, being very much about Perdiccas' sort of political machinations, and this sort of ties into that. These two have tied themselves to his camp to a degree, and this question of his Perdiccas is in theory sort of regent over the baby that has now been born. We have a baby. It is a son. So that particular political action has been laid out. Thoughts on that scene, and for those who were here before, how it fits into everything else. Who wants to leap in with thoughts? I've been vamping for long enough. Someone has an opinion, surely. Liza.
Yes, I do, but stop calling me Shirley. What I like about this scene is that it sounds more like people talking to each other. A lot of Alexander, we have two very good readers here, so that's part of it, but a lot of Alexander sounds like people declaiming things in rhyming verse and having philosophical thoughts, and it can all get very samey, but this actually sounds as though two people are having a conversation. And even though there's a lot of, because in neoclassical stuff, all the action happens off stage and the drama is in people telling each other about it. So we get some storytelling, we get some raconteuring, but it seems like the stories are significant to both the person telling them and the person hearing them. Whereas in some of the scenes with the generals we've had before, they're like, oh, tell me about your latest battle. Well, it was very bloody and here's 24 lines of pentameter about it. Oh, well, jolly good. It seemed like it was all sort of not so much drama, but long-form narrative poetry for the audience's benefit. So I like this scene. It's human, it's humane. I wonder if Roxane has her baby on stage at this point. Maybe there's a cradle that she's rocking, or something like that. Just always, there are almost no stage directions in these, so it's always fun to imagine what might be going on.
Yeah, and the text sort of does throw in that they're not necessarily the most subtle of breaks in the way people are speaking, but we do keep having these sort of little stumbles where people are doing and alas, and not necessarily subtle, but it does get the impression that these are people who are not always speaking fluidly. that they're stumbling over things and they're being hit by waves of emotion, and whereas everybody else has very much been, I am speaking now and I will continue speaking and I will speak in this voice, and that is good, yes. Whereas there's a sense of hesitancy sometimes, and there's a sense of how it's broken up, and that anger exists as well. There's some nice anger in places. I particularly like the curse on Babylon. I quite liked that bit. Other thoughts in the room? Eric?
I like how if you sort of, I don't know how to explain this properly, but like, you know how some mothers think that their kids are the best in the world. You could just play that totally like genuinely, because obviously this is Alexander the Great, not because this is but I just like how Olympias has this mother of a matchless man, no one can match my boy. It just felt a bit comical to me. I was like, yeah, my kid is special. He was obviously, but yeah, it was a nice touch.
But there is a nice bit when Olympias does say, you know, I did warn him, but he wouldn't listen to me because I was a woman. And you know, there is that sort of there is a rebuke in there. After all of this grief and all of this, wasn't he great? Wasn't he wonderful? You know, he didn't listen. He didn't listen to his mother. Other thoughts in the room? Desna.
So I haven't read any of the preceding scenes, so I can't get the contrast. But it does feel quite. Is intimate the right word? I'm not sure it is, but yeah, this back and forth between the mother and the wife of Alexander. I like those kind of contradictions about my wonderful son, but I'm the only one who can say that, you know, giving that ticking off for not listening to me. It kind of feels it's a really human thing against these other things about Olympia saying, oh, but, you know, him being godlike and maybe her being part of, you know, a range of deities as well. Yeah, I really like that contrast.
And you know, we are talking about Alexander the Great, so there is a part of me going, well, you know, I don't think we should be too hard on Alexander for you know, not passing the Bechdel test on this particular scene, but there is always a part of you going, well, it would be nice if people did other things as well. Emma, any thoughts on Roxane?
Yeah, I really like this scene. Obviously, it's the first one I've read in this play, but I think this, as Liza said, there is so much in it. You know, the recalling things, the storytelling, the shared pain between the two women. And as an actor, I always really love when you've got an emotional scene, the idea of using a displacement activity. It somehow makes it more poignant. So having the idea of having the baby on stage, perhaps they could be kind of moving around, seeing to the baby the whole time whilst having this conversation. And I kind of pictured that and thought I think that would work really well, actually. It would be interesting.
Okay, well, the act isn't over yet. We have a chorus, being choric. So we've Act 3. We just to remind you, say we had a scene of political manoeuvring with Perdiccas, trying to decide his next move, and we had this scene of grief, which connected with that. Let's see whether any themes or connective tissues are connected with the chorus, as the chorus speaks to close the act.
Lo, how all good decays, and ills do now abound. In this sky-compassed round there is no kind of trust, for mankind, whilst it strays in pleasure-paved ways, with floods of vice is drowned, and doth, far from refuge, in endless shadows lodge, yet strives to rise no more. No doubt, as most unjust, the world once perish must. And worse now to restore than it was of before, when at the last deluge men by Deucalion once were made again of stones. And well this wicked race bewrays a stony kind, which bears a stubborn mind, still hardened unto sin. Lo, now in every place all virtuous motions cease, and sacred faith we find far from the earth is fled, whose flight huge mischief bred, and fills the world with wars, whilst impious breasts begin to let base treason in, which common concord mars, whilst all men live at jars, and nets of fraud do spread, the simple to surprise, too witty but not wise. Yet those who in deceit their confidence repose, a thing more dear do lose than can by guile be gained, which, when repented late, may ruin once their state, which, whilst purer sprites disclose with what their breasts are stored, for though they would remord, they get not trust again, but having honour stained and covenants profaned, are held in high disdain, and do in end remain of all the world abhorred, not trusty when they should, not trusted when they would. But our nobles now, lo, like Lysander still, so that they get their will, regard not by what way, and with a shameless brow do of the end allow, even though the means were ill, which all the world may see, disgraceth their degree, who, changing every hour, do all base slights assay. What can brave minds dismay, whose worth is like a tower against all fortune's power? Still from all fraud, whilst free, these keep their course unknown, whom it would shame if shown, who not from worth digress, to slights which fear imparts, do show heroic hearts, the which would rather far an open hate profess than basely it suppress. No glory comes from fearful arts. But those who do us lead, as for dissembling made, even though that they intend amongst themselves to war, seem in no sort to jar, but friendship do pretend, not like their lord now dead, who trusting to his worth still meant what he spake forth. The great men not for naught do seek the people's love, their deeds that to approve they may their minds allure. But Perdiccas is thought too slowly to have sought their doubtful minds to move, as one who still conceits he may command the fates, his pride so great is grown that none it can it endure, yet stands his state unsure, since odious to his own. He must be once o'erthrown whose humour each man hates. Pride doth her followers all lead headlong to a fall.
Closes the chorus. I like this chorus. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm not noticing any modern cat parallels with referring to a prideful leader who states unsure, disgracing their degree, who changing every hour, do all base slights assay. I'm not seeing any parallels here at all. But yeah, no, this is to the purpose. It's doing some good material. I like the way it's sort of rounding up on Perdiccas as well, their position as stated before, but also hinting at where we might be going. Yeah, I'm not always a fan of the chorus. I like this chorus. Reasonably happy with this chorus. Eric?
Well, also, it's kind of like in the previous chorus, we had the whole avarice thing. Now we have pride. I'm just wondering if we're going to go for other crimes as well. Not crimes,
Vices.
Sins?
Sins,
yeah,
yes.
vices. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we've I don't know how many choruses we get. I don't think we're going to get the full 7. But you know, pride and avarice, they're pretty big ones. And I think we've discussed, or other people have discussed previously with texts as to, you know, which of the 7 deadly sins is the most deadly, shifts with fashion to a degree as well. That some are hotter on avarice and some are more hot on pride, are different depending on time and just general things. Liza, you were waving.
Oh, not waving but drowning. One thing I liked about this chorus was short lines. I mean, I love a good line of pentameter as much as the next person, but Alexander's lines of pentameters seem very long. Possibly because the rhythm is sort of similar and they're all end stopped. But in the choruses, the lines are shorter, the rhyme schemes start to mix it up a bit. So it feels as though it goes a little faster. It certainly feels a little faster to speak.
Yeah, we've had these shorter line choruses quite a few times in text, and yes, it's sort of a palate cleanser, isn't it? It's sort of tricky to do, but it's nice to have, if that makes sense. That it's easy to trip over these shorter lines in a way that the more stolid verse doesn't. Any other thoughts on the chorus or Act 3 generally? Before we dive into Act 4 and the point where the scene numbering might be a bit dodgy. There is some confusion in my mind. I can't necessarily stand it. Act 4, Scene 1, as nobody's waving at me. We have Antigonus. Have we met Antigonus? Did Antigonus say something earlier? I can't remember. Don't recall an Antigonus. Yes, no, there was an Antigonus last time. Someone read Antigonus. It was me. So, there we are. It was one of the people at the general meeting earlier who was basically going, the Macedonians aren't going to go with a baby. They're going to say that the regency idea with a baby is not a good idea, and we should go to the I think the bastard son. I think is it was his argument. So we've met him before. We've also met Eumedes before as well. He was on very firmly on Perdiccas's camp. So we got one who was not sure who Antigonus was siding with necessarily. Might be on Ptolemy's side. Not sure. Might be just on his own side. Let's see what's happened since Act 3, because I wouldn't be surprised if some time has passed. It's a bit like Chekhov, It's what happens between the scenes that matter. Act 4, Scene 1, take it away.
The stormy discord and tumultuous wars do fire the minds of men with flames of rage, that having haughty thoughts as heaven hath stars, that their indignation nothing can assuage. Yet lo, amongst the soldiers' waving bowers, the herald's cries do calm the trumpet sounds, and peace dare interpose unarmed powers to limit for a time Bellona's bounds. And whilst of a fury they suspend the effects, the seeming friended foes together treat, and everyone shows what his soul affects, of peace a shadow. The essence must be great. Thus men magnanimous amidst the field do dare of their enemies to the promised trust, and loathing what disloyalty doth yield, not violate their vows nor prove unjust. Though love be past, yet truth should still remain. I virtuous parts even in my foes applaud. Gallant mind doth greater glory gain, to die with honor than to live by fraud. And why Eumedes as mistrusting me, or standing on your reputation long, did you disdain to seek, as all men see, a greater than yourself and one more strong?
Though we come not to plead our birthright here, let him, for warriors so should take their place, in whom best signs of nobleness appear, be graced, as first who doth adorn a race. Most noble he who still by virtue strives, to leave his name in minds of men engraved, and to his offspring greater glory gives than from his ancestors he hath received. Erst we by birth in war not marshalled stood, as at the table upon ivory beds. A soldier's worth consists not in his blood, but in their blood which, as his foes, he sheds. Whatever others of my lineage try, I am Eumedes, and will not accord that there can be a greater man than I, whilst as I have a heart, a hand, a sword.
Lo, when prosperity too much prevails, above the judgment thus of vulgar minds, as little barges burdened with great sails, they move in state, so swollen with fortune's winds, and as adversity the sprite refines from the abject dross of pride and passion's base, that in affliction virtue clearest shines, and makes one all the ways of wit to trace. So doth good success make the judgment die. Then whilst the fortunate their ease do take, and lulled asleep in pleasure's meadows lie, as for the slaughter fat and ripe to shake. Yet this the nature is of gallant men, to rest as in no state of too much involved, when prospering wary and most humble then, if crossed courageous, when embarked resolved. But though your first attempts renowned are, by which you in two fields victorious stood, and did o'erthrow two thunderbolts of war, who lost their lives amidst the crimson flood, then yet is that course of victory controlled, and you have tried what force your force succeeds. That then faded laurels should not make you bold, as still reposing on your bypass deeds. For by the fame to indignation moved, the Macedonians all abhor your name, who at that time so proud the conqueror proved, the great man's slaughter having winged your fame.
No fortune past so puffs up my conceit that it contempt of further danger brings. Nor am I now dejected so of late, but I intend to do far greater things. He, by prosperity made never proud, who knows the frailty of this earthly frame, can hardly by adversity be bowed. The sun, although eclipsed, remains the same. Worth should by the events not be thralled to wit, on the accidents as the essence did depend. The fault of fortune cannot blemish it, on which oft times disasters may attend. Though fortune, stumbling right, concur with worth, or yet it crosses brag a gallant mind, both like themselves are always sprinkling forth in every state some tokens of their kind. Now, at this time, matched by numerous powers, I kept my courage, though I lost the field, and vaunt no more of this, for some few hours may once to me the like advantage yield. Nor is it long since that, to fortune dear, the world had never me but victor spied, though I protest, by all the immortals here, pressed by necessity, not moved by pride. Proud Neoptolemus, that traitor still, not worthy of a Macedonian's name, he to betray the host, and me to kill, had laboured long to his eternal shame. But I, of Craterus, lament the fall, whom for his virtue I did dearly love, and was constrained, I love to witness call, for my defence that refuge last to prove.
How fortune you your forces to dispose so well to escape that storm of threatened harms? For then you had to deal with mighty foes who were in war grown hoary under arms.
When Neoptolemus did clearly spy that all his treason to the light was brought, he, where our foes were camped, with haste did fly, a foolish traitor who was false for naught. There he informed, or misinformed my foes, that by good success grown secure of late, I in my tent did carelessly repose, though not by force, to be overcome by fate. And to Antipater he further told, that Macedonians, if they at that time of Craterus the countenance did behold, and willingly would yield themselves to him, now they had laboured earnestly before, that I abandon would Perdiccas part, and did protest that they would give me more than yet I had, or hoped for in my heart. But love, born free, cannot be thralled nor bought, more than a shameful peace, I like just strife. To generous minds more dear than honour naught, and ere I leave my faith, I'll lose my life. Thus, when despair that I would prove their friend, they sought in time to plague me as a foe, where love could not begin, but hate might end, and came in haste to have surprised me so. But Neoptolemus, to cross by sight, the Macedonians I for him did bend, and Craterus, concealing from their sight, to match with him caused troops of strangers tend. This policy, which none could justly blame, I with myself in secret did conspire, and had my shirt been privy to the same, I should have been an offering to the fire. When death's first game, with danger played, was past, I Neoptolemus did toil to find, and he me too, which happened at the last. Two will do much to meet, when of one mind. Then whilst we met, for whom both the armies warred, whose fortune did depend upon our hands, all was performed that force or fury dared, while both were bent to abate the other's bands. And yet the heavens would not betray my trust. Foul treason never had a fairer end, but smiled upon my cause, as which was just, and did destruction to the traitor send. For, forced by him whose force he did despise, though fighting fiercely long, he lost his breath, as one more strong than true, more stout than wise, whose greatest honour was his honest death. But weakened with huge wounds, almost I died, in seas of blood, even quite from knowledge strayed. Yet by so great a victory revived, my courage grew more than my strength decayed. I, having finished thus this fatal strife, did come where Craterus his course had run, even in the confines placed twixt death and life, the one near gone, the other not begun. He with great valour had resisted long, as all Briareus' hands had moved his sword, and did his master's memory no wrong, whilst with his courage not his fortune stored. What life refused to gain by death, he thought, for life and death are but indifferent things, and of themselves not to be shunned nor sought, but for the good or ill that either brings. With endless glory bent to change his breath, of desperate valour all the power was proved, and for great captains no more glorious death than to die fighting with a mind unmoved. When it appeared where victory did tend, the army's courage with their captain fell, and whilst I safely might be seen a friend, I went where death his spirits did expel, and whilst I told how both to be betrayed by Neoptolemus were brought about, my woe with tears I to the world bewrayed. Mild pity and true kindness must burst out. Ah, if the news of this that I express has come in time unto Perdiccas' ears, he might have lived their pride now to repress, who by his fall were first divorced from fears.
The humour of that man was too well known. Could he have parted other men from pride, whose soul is sold a slave unto his own, and for the same forced by his followers died?
The proud must still be plagued by prouder ones. There must be had sharp steel to smooth rough stones.
No vice than pride doth greater hate procure, which foes do scorn and friends cannot endure.
Yet majesty must not itself deject. A lofty carriage doth procure respect.
A haughty gesture shows a tyrant's heart. All love a courteous countenance void of art.
Yet manners, too submiss as much condemned, do make kings scorned and captains be contemned.
A humble port, kind looks, words smooth and soft, are means by which great minds may mount aloft.
Those are indeed for such as raise their flight. They may do more whose course is at the height. Imperious forms an empire must defend.
Thus hastened was Perdiccas to his end.
That worthy man had many fair designs, but virtue still by envy is pursued, though, as a candle in the night best shines, in a victorious age may best be viewed. There was a man who scorned secure delights, as still despising pain, attemptive, bold, a brave observer of the ancient rites, steel strictly grasping, prodigal of gold. He loved to have the soldiers of his band choosed at the musters, not in markets bought, and would not flatter where he might command, more meet to have than seek that which he sought. But soldiers now in this degenerate age are fawned on by faint minds, bribed in such sort, that all the reins enlarged into the rage, they with so straight a course cannot comport. What was misfortune known unto them all, their malice as some great neglect did cite. All things must help the unhappy men to fall, Thus forth they spewed the poison of their spite, for, hating his frank form and naked words, by that occasion whetting their desires, they, in his body, boldly sheathed their swords, a deed which even barbarity admires. Those traitorous troops may spot the purest bands, if, for a fact so vile they be excused, this will set swords in all our soldiers' hands, against us, and not for us to be used.
I wish that soldiers never could be brought to prove so mutinous as they oft have been, and that they durst not violate in aught those who by them as sacred should be seen. Nor like I captains who, like blustering winds, would o'er their troops insult as tyrants still, not weighing merits, not respecting minds, as carried headlong with a winded will. Pride by presumption bred when at a height, encountering with a contempt both match in ire, and twixt them, bring base cruelty to light, the loathsome offspring of a hated sire. Such of Perdiccas was the monstrous pride, the vice from which that vice more vile proceeds, that it strange ways for his advancement tried, and did burst forth in most prodigious deeds. At first by Meleager's death when stained, he showed what tyrants harbored in his heart, to whom faith given, nor yet the church he gained, though sacred both, nor safety could impart. The Cappadocians, when all else was tried, choosed rather than his insolence to bear by massacring themselves to escape from pride. Pride, spite, and horror, death breeds only fear. Yet what against his foes he did perform, from martial minds might plead for some excuse, since irritated thoughts which wronged do storm, in minds offended fury do infuse. But yet, why sought he in a servile sort to play the tyrant, braving his best friends, who with disdainful forms could not comport? More than an enemy's yoke a friend's offends, and when of late, by Ptolemy constrained, he brought his bands with disadvantage back, how by the same his government was stained, the world can witness by his army's rack. But hate made judge. Each error seems a crime, whilst present ills do aggravate things gone. His soldiers, moved by fortune and the time, did by his death venge all their wrongs in one.
As naught smells well to a distempered taste, so to conceits preoccupied before, even good seems bad in them whom they detest. Men must mislike where they can like no more. To you, who loathe Perdiccas and his state, whatever came of him could not seem good. And I not wonder, though your soul did hate, one who had rights and power to take your blood, for, fled from him to whom you once belonged, his trumpets still breathe terror in your ear. Then all men hate those whom they once have wronged, and by no means can love them whom they fear.
At which you speak of hate, in love I spy. Love cannot find an imperfection forth, but doth excuse, extenuate, or deny faults where it likes with shadows of no worth. I left Perdiccas, but did him no wrong, who first to take my life by all means did prove. I told Antipater how he so long had been abused by a pretended love. For as I frankly love, whilst loved again, if the ingrate ingrately meet acquite, straight kindling fury with a just disdain, I by love past proportion than my spite. And yet, Eumedes, I commend thy mind, who to defend thy friend has proved so free, and since in love so constantly inclined, of friendship firm I would contract with thee. Then where that now thy state hath been brought low, since spoiled of him in whom thou didst repose, whilst aided by our power, thou mayest grow and raise thy hopes of kingdoms to dispose.
I'll be your friend, whilst friend to right you rest. For without virtue, friendship is but vain, which cannot lodge in a polluted breast, whose impious thoughts do sacred things profane. While as the oath is kept, which once was sworn to Alexander's self and to his race, still shall this sword for your defence be borne. But in my heart they hold the highest place. And do not thus, as o'er one vanquished, vaunt, nor think me thralled, though once by chance o'erthrown. The world must perish ere adventurers want, who toss all states to establish once their own, whilst bravely taking or yet giving place. However fear, objecting danger, comes, misfortune, bondage, torment, death, disgrace, and all things else, a mind resolved o'ercomes.
And thus ends the scene. So, yeah, we spent the first three acts, or Act 2 and 3, very, very into the Purdy's story. Purdy's dead. Purdy got killed. Was deaded by his own soldiers. That's got to be a kick in the teeth. And so here we have one of Purdy's antagonists, Antigonus, chatting up, as it were, Eumedes, saying, "Hi, well, your guy's dead. Why don't you join me? We can make beautiful music together." There's especially at the end, I'll be, this sort of stalking round each other. How much do they trust each other? Does anyone trust anyone in this universe now? I think, Eric, did you put is that you in the chat? I made him an offer he could not refuse. sort of quality to it. And Eumedes, who's on the whole seemed like on the side of some sort of moral standards. He was the one trying to tell Perdiccas, don't just kill everyone. Well, maybe kill some people. Maybe we should watch our moral standards here, because everything slips into the mud. We're all doomed. Maybe he's just too nice for this lot. Maybe, I don't know. Is he gonna? So long as I'll join you, so long as the oath is kept, which once was sworn to Alexander's self and to his race, to his children. So I'll stick with you if you don't do anything child murdery, and power grabby. Liza.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting scene, and Eumedes seems very much to be about loyalty. That he
Eumedes,
condemns Antigonus for having left Perdiccas, who presumably Perdiccas was his general, and he just sort of seceded and took his forces off. And then at the end, when Antigonus says, "Well, your general, whom I betrayed, is dead. Will you be my friend now?" And Eumedes very wisely says, "Okay, but only as long as you're worth my loyalty." So, I like that. I like the sort of shifting allegiances. And earlier we had, I think Perdiccas himself had a line that said, "All in such days must do or suffer wrong." So there's no morally right choice. It's all a bunch of grays, and these two characters do seem to be trying to pick some sort of rightness of choice out of the multitude of bad choices available to them.
Yeah, it's all shifting sands. There's no centre to hold. It's not going well. Eric.
Yeah, I just I'm now hearing, because of the whole "I'll be your friend" thing. I just keep hearing the song "You Got a Friend" in my head playing over and over. Yeah.
I don't think this is Woody
James Taylor or Disney's Aladdin?
The former.
Yes.
I was
my
going with Toy
godfather
Story.
wrote a couple songs for James Taylor.
Other thoughts before we go too much on this tangent? Emma.
Just to say that I liked how the writer kind of mixes up the length of the speeches. He had the longer speeches, and then you had this section in the sort of 2/3 of the way through where it's all very short, and it gets a bit more kind of between them, and that's kind of fun. I like the way the pace changes in a kind of negotiating sort of scene. I like the changes in pace. I don't know if this has been discussed before, but some sections are in quotation marks. I'm just wondering what the significance of that is.
Yes, we haven't actually discussed this out loud. We've discussed it in the chat about the way quotation marks are sometimes used in texts. And for some texts, it seems to be sometimes just for emphasis. Sometimes it's explicitly to flag up a proverb or a saying, and sometimes it's sort of summing up the essence of what has just been said. Liza.
I think it's just bits that the author considers quotable. So bits you could take out and have your children memorize, or your school students. They seem to, in general, be bits where characters comment on the action or philosophically extrapolate from it in some way, rather than bits where they convey story or that are character based.
Yeah, they're summing up themes or the ideas. I mean, this scene specifically is very much single lines, which are very quotable. But we do have sequences where, whole pages, and I changed the formatting of how it's laid out, because you used to have quotation marks down either side of the column going all the way, and it just made it quite difficult to read. Pages and pages of it, which makes it quite difficult for it to decide precisely what it's for, because it becomes like it's like someone going through a textbook and highlighting things, but they just end up highlighting the entire page, and so it doesn't feel always consistent as to what its function is. But we have this all the way through these kind of neoclassical plays. It turns up in Gorboduc as well, going back to 1560, 61. So it's not a new thing, and as I say, it depends on the author and what precisely they want to be doing, and sometimes I think, it's sometimes just whim. I don't know if it's necessarily very helpful for the reader or for actors. It's interesting rather than necessarily helpful.
Okay, it's just, as an actor, I'm always really interested in punctuation, because quite often that's where a lot of the clues lie. And I've noticed there's lots of parts that are in brackets as well, sort of suggesting either a part that's emphasized or perhaps softened depending on the context, which is always fun to kind of work out what to do with that, or what the clue is.
Yeah, I found that interesting too. The use of brackets, which we do find a lot of in texts of this period. They seem to be phrases which nowadays might be separated by commas, but Giles Block, who has a wonderful book on text out called Speaking the Speech, referred to these little subclauses as his word is pop-ups. And I find that I don't know, both the use of brackets and quotation marks, while they look a little bit weird to my eyes, at a cold read, they're really helping me with structure.
I agree with the comments with the brackets. I'm not sure about the quotation, because I don't think there's any structural. I don't know that they're structural, actually. They're in the same way.
Well, just that they seem to generally, they often, can't say always, but they often seem to indicate just places where characters comment on something they've just said, or comment on a situation. And so often after a close quote, often there's a new subject.
By the way, from earlier. So we'll.
I refrained from saying the name.
You broke the rules. It's fine.
I suppose
we'll move on. No, you don't. We just move on. It's fine. Eric.
Well, it's more a question rather than an observation. But do we know who Neoptolemus is, or is this just like somebody else that has been killed and we don't really know his name, or like what's his name? Aristides, who was mentioned off stage, and this kind of we haven't met the guy.
Yeah,
or is it just Ptolemy and like renamed?
I genuinely don't know. I have to say that sequence of the text, I did sort of go, I'm not quite sure what's going on, because we know who Antipater is. That he's been actually very carefully discussed. He's sort of that offstage character that we know quite a lot about, who's been quite consistently seeded throughout the text. But actually, I haven't a clue to the answer to the question. Liza probably can.
Aridaeus was mentioned in the first group scene, which we read last session. The scene, the play opens with Alexander's ghost, and then you see all Alexander's generals talking right after his death, and they're all. Is Emma here? Did she disappear?
Oh, it looks like she's disappeared. Well, continue, and we'll hopefully she'll reappear.
So Aridaeus, in that first scene, they're discussing who should take over from Alexander. Should it be his yet unborn legitimate son? Should it be his teenage illegitimate son? Or should it be his brother, his half-brother, Philip of Macedon's bastard son, Aridaeus? And they're saying, well, Alexander's got a perfectly good brother who could take over, and then someone else gives a speech. We're in who Philip Aridaeus is, and someone else gives a speech saying, no, Aridaeus can't take over. Are you kidding? He's so stupid and so easily led. Don't make him king. And I don't know if we even meet him in this play, or if they're talked about, or if he's just talked about by other people. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, it was more the Neoptolemus and Craterus. You know, the people who Eumedes was effectively fighting. Is a description of this battle thing that was going on, and it didn't feel weird. It didn't feel particularly well signposted. I was sort of going, I don't know why anyone's telling me these things, and it took me a while to sort of get into it and then come out the other side. Emma has returned.
What makes this a little harder is that, because I'm pretty sure Alexander was not writing for the actual stage, he was just writing either to be read, or to be read in silence, or to be read aloud. So he's writing for other people who've received the same education he has, and therefore he doesn't think he has to explain anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's leaning very heavily on the argument at the beginning, which isn't a performative text, and he doesn't do exposition very well, and doesn't do the basic signposting that you put into scenes, telling you who people are. I mean, this is actually an unusual scene in the sense that we're repeatedly told who Eumedes is. As Antigonus keeps going, yes, you, Eumedes, how are you, Eumedes? In a way that's a bit weird and creepy. Actually, I wonder if that's deliberate. There's something interesting there, or could be made of that. Any other thoughts before we dive into our next scene? No. Okay, we're going into what we're calling Act 4, Scene 2, possibly because it is. We are returning to Lysimachus, who we have met before as doing some evil plotting. Not so evil plotting. It wasn't necessarily evil.
Everyone in this play is plotting something, and Lysimachus didn't seem to be plotting anything worse than anyone else.
It was more cunning, because he was basically going, shall we just sit this one out until everyone else has killed each other, and then we'll swoop in and take all the prize. But then we also have Cassander, who we have heard is an evil poisoning bastard in the narrative earlier.
Yes, I think he's Antipater's son, or something.
Yes, or his agent. I'm not quite sure. It was definitely he was the one pushing them in that direction. So I don't know if the text has actually explicated that properly or not. We shall find out. Anyway, we haven't met them before. We've met Lysimachus, but we haven't met Cassander before. Act 4, Scene 2, take it away.
And must we buy our pomp at such a rate who bear the authority, or whom it bears? Oh, how thorny are the ways of state, with open dangers paved and secret fears. Each of our steps is weighted with some snare, whilst from ourselves we all repose repel. and in frail barks pressed by tempestuous care do seek a haven whose heaven is but a hell.
Whilst Aeolus and Neptune joined in all, with winds and waves beat the earth and brag the skies, the tumbling mountains do not rise and fall, though each them another doth surprise. As do the aspiring powers which are with doubt tossed through the waving world on stormy thrones, and are, as in a circle, hurled about, ascending and descending both at once. Lo, some whose hopes would at their birth have seemed by fortune's strictness with contempt confined, have from the vulgar yoke themselves redeemed, to do far more than such durst have designed. And they who once might life to thousands give, when some great period revolutions brings, brought down even low, cannot have leave to live, made less than subjects, who were more than kings.
What once they scarce could dream, some thus procure, whose power though naught at first, last sceptres sways, and some whose states seemed once to be secure, thrown from their fortune's height, lose glorious bays. My father, lo, to gain that sovereign place, through many dangers boldly marched of late, and did such monstrous cruelties commit in plaguing Philip and his queen of late. Lo, now brought low to taste the like estate, must take such entertainment as she gave. And yet good reason that it should be so, such measure as we give we must receive. Whilst on a throne she proudly erst did sit, and with disdainful eyes looked on her foe, as only vanquished by her power and wit. She did not weigh what doth proceed from fate. Oh, the immortals which command above, of every state in hand the rudder have, and as they like can make us stay or go. The grief of others should us greatly move, as those who sometime may like fortune prove. But as experience with rare proofs have shown, to look on others we have lynx's eyes, whilst we would have their imperfections known, yet like blind moles can never mark our own. Such clouds of self-regard do dim our sight. Why should we be puffed up when foes do fall? Since what today doth on another light, the same tomorrow may our state surprise. Those that on this inconstant, constant ball do live environed with the all-circling skies, have many means whereby to be o'erthrown. And why should dying worldlings swoln with wrath so tyrannize o'er an afflicted wight, since miseries are common unto all? Let none be proud who draw a doubtful breath. Good hap attends but few unto their death.
And they exit. It's short. I mean, it was just gearing up and then... Woof. Yeah. That was sort of stopped. Yeah, Liza.
I am wondering if that speech of Cassander's might have been a rough draft of something written as a chorus.
Yeah, I'm looking ahead at Act 5, Scene 2, and thinking that maybe that's the beginning of a scene, and that there's something structurally wrong. I was saying there's something wrong about the scene ordering, and that might be the actual answer. So it might be that actually this should live somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, we're out of the ABAB rhyme scheme, and we've gone into a rhyme scheme more associated with choruses. And it also that last speech also doesn't seem to be particularly characterized, apart from the bit at the beginning about Cassander's father.
Mm. Yeah, I'm inclined to say that we might see how that flows into the next one. Look into. I couldn't see in the version we had that things were out of place, but I do know that the numbering of the scenes does not match other accounts that I have, so there may be something a bit wrong there. Anyway, we will perhaps resolve this more to next session.
The wrongness could be Alexander's. You know, he might have written it as a draft of something for chorus and then just stuck it into.
I don't think so. I think there is something out of sync in our text, and I'm not sure why. But I hadn't resolved it before we came in here. Sometimes we figure it out as we go along. But that definitely felt like that wasn't quite a scene. That felt like a bit of a scene. Yeah. So we'll see. Maybe it connects with the scene from later on in the play. Thoughts about what Cassander started to say, and Lysimachus. How did we feel about that so far? Liza, you were doing most of the Cassandering. How are you finding it?
Well, I mean, some of the little sententiae that Alexander keeps putting in, like, to look on others, we have lynx's eyes, saying, we're really good at noticing everyone else's imperfection, but we don't notice our own. I quite like that. And the last bit of the speech from classical Greece to now has been a commonplace that you shouldn't pronounce that someone is happy unless they're already dead and you can evaluate their entire life. Because if you say that someone's happy during their life, they might lose it all, and where would you be then?
Okay, I think we're going to have to park that scene until we can resolve questions with it. But Eric, before we go on, you have a thought?
Didn't we also have like the tragedy of Croesus or something, which Alexander wrote, or is that just me? I mean, which we've read, which is also
yes.
about like happy ending of life and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yes, I think we yes, he definitely did write a Croesus, which we have done. Yes.
Emma, was your hand up?
No, it wasn't. I'm probably just scratching my head. I'm just trying to get my head around the scene, that's all.
Yeah.
Fair enough, so am I.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we may be able to resolve this problem next time. It will be fine when we do so. We have little time in lieu for then. So we're going to go with what's currently called Act 5, Scene 1, but I suspect might not be. And we're going to have a look at Aristotle and Phocion and see what's going on there as we get into some other action of which I don't know what's happening. So let's see what happens in this scene.
Long have I used the light which clears my mind. On nature's labors curiously to look, and of all creatures finding out the kind of read strange wonders in the world's great book. I mark her course by contraries maintained, whose harmony doth most subsist by strife, and of all creatures in the same contained. How various is the mystery of life! But as in all things are subject unto change, which partners are of the elemental powers, so rolled about with revolutions strange, the state of man rests constant scarce for hours. Lo, what doth fame more frequently report than sudden risings and more sudden falls? I think the world is but a tennis court, where fortune doth play states, toss men for balls.
And never any age showed more than this, the wavering state of soul ennobled wights, who soar too high to catch an airy bliss, whilst lowest falls attend the highest flights. That matchless monarch who was born, it seemed, to show how high mortality attains, hath not from death the adored flesh redeemed, but pain hath made an end of all his pains. And those brave bands which furnished fame with breath, whilst all the world their valorous deeds did spy, rest now, confounded since their sovereign's death, like Polyphemus having lost his eye. And they are like that teeth-engendered brood who took their life out of a monster dead, whilst each of them would drink the other's blood, since that great dragon's death who was their head.
So change all things which are subject are to sight. Disorder order breeds, and order it. Next light comes darkness, and next darkness light, which this never changing change transcends our wit. Thus health and sickness, poverty and state, dishonor, honor, life and death, with doubt still interchanging. What a true deceit! All linked together, slide by turns about. To worldly states the heavens a height appoint, where when they once arrive, they must descend, and all perfections have a fatal point, at which excellency itself must end. But as all those who walk on the earth are crossed with alterations happening oft and strange, the greatest states with greatest storms are tossed, and sort of many, must make many a change. Nor speak I this by speculation moved, as gathering credit out of ancient scrolls. No, no, I have lived at court, and oft have proved nothing below more vexed than great men's souls. The tyrant honors thralls, while as they moan, their plaints to vulgar ears loath to impart. They all the weight of woes must bear alone, where others of their grief lend friends apart. Their very rising o'er us to the height, which seems the best there is worst, for being lords, they can never know the truth that comes to light, when frank society speaks naked words. Whilst sadness oft seems majestic, time tells how dear they buy their pomp with loss of rest. Some but 3 Furies reign in all the hells. There are 3,000 in one great man's breast.
I think all monarchies are like the moon, which now eclipsed, now under cloud, now clear, grows by degrees, and is, when full, undone. Yet Aeson, like renewed doth reappear. For lo, they first but small begin to shine, and when they once their spheric form obtain, do coldly languish, and, till changed, decline. Yet fallen, in other realms do rise again. Assyria once made many nations bow, then next all powers in the Persians' hand, and Macedonians last, grown monarchs now, amongst themselves divided cannot stand.
A secret fate alternately, all things doth in this circle circularly lead, still generation from corruption springs, that some may live, of force some must be dead. Each element another's strength devours. The air to the fire succumbs, the fire to rain, the waters strive to drown the earth with showers, which it by vapors vomits out again. Thus, with a Gordian knot together bound, all things are made, unmade, and made again. Whilst ruin founds, perfection doth confound. Whilst if free from change, no state can long remain, but what in the earth can more dangerously stand than sovereignty, though rated at such worth, which, like the stormy god's tumultuous bands, doth fly from the east to west, from south to north.
A long experience now makes this not strange, that mighty states whose reigns one only leads, be oft distracted and constrained to change, as 2 great bodies with so little heads. Since every commonwealth, where all men's wits do join in one to breed the public ease, hath many fevers and pestiferous fits, which physic oft poison must appease. For, the multitude, more rash than wise, a hydra-headed beast which humour blinds, doth passionately praise, or else despise, as some preposterous fancies move their minds. From vice and virtue oft like danger flows, whilst the one breeds envy and the other hate, as jealousy or emulation grows. Those oft are crushed who do support a state.
Whilst some their betters, others equals scorn. The popular authority decays, and when it dies, the monarchy is born, whose violence disorders fury stays. The reign of state it with the most ease doth sway, of power as joined in one, the strongest kind. Still was it humbly high, doth hold away, twixt tyranny and too remiss a mind. But those states are ruled by one may flourish long, whilst one can well command and all obey. Whilst guerdon goodness, vengeance follows wrong, that virtue cherished, vice is made decay. Yet, if naught else, time doth great states overcome, and all are bounded by some fatal hour. What misadventures many ways may come to dissipate the most united power. Oh, huge mishaps a monarchy may mar, when prosperous times do, forced by fates, expire, to further which oft strangers must make war, and mutinous subjects sometime may conspire. As jealous fear, when braved by danger moves, all princes would suppress aspirers still. And then the subject's course most dangerous proves, when either fear or hope transports his will. But though that first to rise, lost to descend, great states are guided by a secret fate. Yet Still the course which doth forego their end springs from contempt, or is enforced by hate. The first in kings the lack of courage breeds, encouraging ambition to rebel. The other doth attend tyrannic deeds, that violence may violence repel.
Yet never did so many monarchs fall by foreign battles, nor by civil broils, as by themselves who, seeming free, were thrall, whilst smooth-tongued minions gloried of their spoils. Those who have reigned by choice, by birth or worth, or did encroach on crowns by chance or crime, oft suffer vices to burst freely forth, which virtue's colours gilded till that time. Men clearly show what harbours in their breast, whilst envy's object, free from any fear, that which is eminent is marked best, and highest fortunes hardest are to bear. Low states to censure critics do despise, whilst oft gross faults for virtue's fame esteems. The stupid, patient, and the fearful wise will constancy and softness, goodness seems. But on the stage of state where one must stand, a public actor placed in all men's sight, and swaying power, with an imperious hand, doth hold the balance both of wrong and right, then he, for every action that is his, the censure of 1,000 tongues must have, not only damned for doing things amiss, but for not doing all that all men crave. That prince but undermines the sovereign seat. Who cares not who be weak, so he be strong, more studious for himself than for the state, or, if for it, that he may hold it long. For where love him for all men's good ordains, he thinks both them and theirs made him to please, as if a charge of weight, a place of pains, were but a bed of rest, a heaven of ease. The world's great weight, which Atlas' shoulders bear, is not so weighty all to weigh one down, as that which on his head a king doth wear. No burdens charge more heavy than a crown. The Aegean waves time may more soon appease than restless thoughts whose course for state prepares. Can they have rest, who toil for all men's ease? The purple ever must be lined with cares.
Good kings are like the fire which, flaming bright, doth waste itself to serve another's tune. And sovereignty is like fire's glancing light, which, if but viewed, delights, if touched, doth burn. I like for warmness to stand Vulcan by, but not to burn amidst the Lemnian flame. In cedar's shadows men more safely lie than on their tops that roaring deities game. All the eye-attracting pomp and glorious shows do merit scorn, though they amazement breed. The world then pity more than envy owes, who to seem happy wretched are indeed. What alterations strange attend a throne, as if the sphere of fortune were a crown. The great still tossed, like Sisyphus his stone, who when raised most high rest ready to fall down. Of this most, what greater proof can fame afford than mighty Philip's memorable fall, who daunted had the Grecians by the sword, though till that time by strangers not made thrall. He, then whilst he solemnized with state his daughter's marriage, suddenly was lost. It seemed when heaven that monarch's days would date, that Hymen's torch gave light to Pluto's post. When strong regards had grieved within my heart the miseries that proper were to court, I thought them happy who, retired apart, could never know such things but by report. I might have lived with Alexander still, to the virtuous men whose favors were not scarce, yet rather choose, though having both at will, to serve with Pallas than command with Mars. And whilst he toiled of others lord to be, I of myself did labor to be lord, and made as great a conquest too as he. My pen shall be famous as his sword.
And had I willingly engaged my rest, the way to trace which to vainglory tends, I might have lived, respected with the best, a special one of Alexander's friends. though I of him did never merit aught, he entertained my friendship till his death. And when he once our city's overthrow sought, at my request did pacify his wrath, then once to me a mass of gold he sent, and offered too a stately Asian town, which I refused, more pleased with my poor rent than he with all the treasures of a crown. I told that such a sum but served to make him a corrupter, me corrupted thought, and foul for him to give, for me to take. If used, shamed both, unused, did serve for naught. But all those baits I never deigned to touch, lest I, who all my life had lived so free, might be possessed too much, possessing much. If taking riches, it had taken me. No, I would rather learn to live with less than for superfluous furniture to strive. Who seeks out substance but to nurse excess, to use it lives, not it that he may live. My fortune doth afford sufficient means that may preserve all nature's powers in force, and he who on a golden sceptre leans cannot have more, but may well use it worse. Then, since abundance but abuses brings, why seek men more than how to be well eased? And, why toil they for so many things, since with a little nature can be pleased?
Lo, how the heavens, who love to man exceeds, have made his body strong, his mind divine, and have made the earth to furnish all his needs. Lest curbing cares might make his thoughts decline, so that he hath a means to raise his flight, if winged with virtue, and may mounting high, by time approach to the celestial light, and deify himself before he die. Yet doth he straight forego that glorious way to toil for things which the earth not forced affords, but which his wants first framed were to defray, but by himself are of his life made lords. Oh, how unworthy the worth of man, or many labors which delight him most, since such corruption boldly which first began to make men nurse vile vice at virtue's cost. And now what hath great Alexander gained by endless travel and excessive cares, of whom, lo now, they only say he reigned, but death unto himself, worse to his heirs. And for the guiltless blood which he hath spilled, his conquest partners, lo, do now begin to die even by the swords by which they killed, and all his offspring expiates his sin.
Strange revolutions sway all worldly things. The wheel of fortune still must slippery prove, and chiefly then when charged it is with kings, whose states as weighty quickly makes it move. Yet Alexander I must say was blessed, who, still a victor, from distress estranged, the world's chief monarch when his state was best, did die in time before his fortune changed. And for his favour, which I oft did try, whom earnestly he laboured to advance, it grieves me that himself so soon did die, and that his offspring hath so hard a chance. His successors have set all Greece on fire, of which I fear to perish by some spark. For Polyperchon doth my death conspire, and who can scape when made a great man's mark? Yet for my country's cause I'll give my blood, while safely praised all follow virtue can. But when by danger bragged, then to do good, that is worthy of a worthy man. Nor do I tender so this puff of breath, but I can yield that nature it expel. A mind that is resolved triumphs over death. He hath lived long enough who hath lived well.
And they exit. So I don't know for certain. You'll have to check the show notes for clarity on this point, but I'm fairly certain this is actually the opening of Act 5, so we have skipped a few scenes to get here. It doesn't matter because this scene has almost no connection with anything else in the play. A couple of philosophers come on, discuss the implications of the absence of Alexander the Great. This, as has been noted in the chat, could happily live in Act 1, actually, apart from the explicit references towards the end. Or, for that matter, they could just pop up every half an hour and just going, so, just checking in. as they debate the points. But it's an interestingly divorced scene from a lot of the rest of the action, apart from, say, a few lines that vaguely do connect with what's probably going on at this moment, which is that the children are in danger. Liza.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like it here because ever since Act One, we've had this this unremitting pursuit of power and this attempt to balance some shred of ethics with that pursuit of power. And here we have two guys who don't want power at all, and they both voluntarily left Alexander. And Phocion is I mean, one gets the sense they almost might be trying to outdo each other in philosophic detachment. That Aristotle is like, well, I left Alexander because I saw no good could come of it. And Phocion is like, yeah, not only did I leave him, but he sent me some money and I refused. So...
Yeah, I didn't care more. No, I didn't care more. I left more than you left.
Yes, so it's sort of the negative of the mirror image of the scenes where guys are like, well, I want to be leader more. Well, I should be leader more. No, I'm a better philosopher. No, me.
Yeah, it's fitting in with that sort of fragmentary view of this sort of collapsing kingdom. That we just have a little episode with some philosophers, just talking through the implications of everything and where they're placed and all this other stuff. And the Wheel of Fortune, always nice to have a reference to the Wheel of Fortune. Always nice when we bring that old chestnut up again. The wheel turns. Eric.
Yeah, it took them a good 10 minutes to start talking about Alexander, though. It's like sort of just, because at the beginning they're like, yes, and people die and things change and sort of, you die and you live and you die and you live and so on and so forth. And the cycle goes on and relentless. And it just felt sort of like, I know where we're going with this, but you could have just been a bit briefer. Life is short, but also, yeah. But they were also agreeing with each other. That was what got me. Just sort of, they were saying exactly the same thing, but in different words.
It's very easy to have a heated argument where you both agree with you're both saying the same thing, but it has the structure as if you're disagreeing with each other. I had a very, very lengthy argument about Ewoks once, where we're basically arguing the same point, and we were screaming at each other by the end. And it didn't matter that we were agreeing. We were very irate with each other for not making the point as well as I was. Desna.
It's so I think I quite liked this sort of. It felt to me like two old guys standing off stage, sort of watching all the young ones thrusting knives about and fighting over who gets the power, and just taking that longer view. And I see what you mean, Eric, about it. It starts off like super broad, quite, anyone could make those sort of platitudinous remarks. And then it sort of zooms in and gets more specific about what's actually happening in the place. So I kind of quite like it. I like that difference in pace or difference in tone from the kind of the intimate stuff between Olympias and Roxane and the bit slightly more, from the other bits.
Yeah, if this was a comic book, you'd have these two people sat at a table, and then sort of around them in the panels would be all the other people fighting and doing terrible things while they're just having their disputation. That's sort of why I quite like the idea of actually feeding this. If this was done as a sort of episodic audio thing, of just we just pop in for a few lines of Aristotle Phocion at the beginning of each episode, and you don't know who they are or why they're talking because they don't. At that initial opening stuff, they're not very specific, and I just quite like that they're a bit random, and then eventually they get to the point in episode 5. But yeah, I like it. It's an interesting oasis actually from everything else that's going on around it. Okay, so we're in that sort of awkward, embarrassing thing of we will resolve the textual issues. I'm fairly certain I know what's gone wrong. We've got a couple of bits of scenes have got detached from each other. I don't quite know how they all go back together again, but I think we've lost the end of Act 4, and things have got detached and end up in random places. It will be resolved before next time. So I think up until we started looking at Act 4. Scene 2, everything was going well, and we may as say have jumped forward with that last scene into the beginning of Act 5. I don't know for certain, because there is no real marker as to where that scene lives, the philosopher's scene. So that in mind, just thinking about the sort of the bits that we've got and what we've liked, what we might do with this, those who've been here since yesterday as well, that sense of the overall shape of this text, it's sort of and what to do with it, and what do we maybe trim down if we're thinking about a stage version. A lot has to get cut. What do we focus in? What do we keep? Can we keep the philosophers, or are they just so nicely tangential? But they do also, you get rid of them, you suddenly reduce your word count quite considerably in one fell swoop, and you can keep other things. Fight your corner as to what you might want to keep or dismiss. For an audio version, that's not inherently a problem. Actually, if it's episodic, people can take it. But yeah, Eric, any final thoughts?
I was just typing this in the chat, so I might as well say it out loud. I obviously this is a tragedy, so not quite the same genre, but yeah, I was thinking that another place that I've seen philosophers arguing on stage is Aristophanes, where you've got like sort of arguing. I think it's his comedy Clouds, where he sort of makes fun of Socrates or something. Yeah, he liked to make fun of people, but like. Just this scene is such kind of, well, not entirely pointless, but I mean, it could be played like sort of over the top sort of analysis of that, but it wouldn't really have a place in it, would it? I don't know. I think I mean, it was fun to read both this scene and other scenes thus far. I don't know what I would cut though. There's a part of me going, I want more Olympias and Roxane, rather than all the guys arguing about whose pen is shinier.
Yes, we will meet Olympia again. No, that's not a spoiler, but I don't think we meet Roxane again. I'm afraid. And that wouldn't be unknown in William Alexander of setting up some characters and then not necessarily doing anything with them. But again, we've been talking about this as a sort of fragmentary thing. Emma, you've only been here for this session, and it's been a bit more fragmented than intended. Any final thoughts?
I really enjoyed reading all the characters and all very different scenes. I loved the scene between Olympias and Roxane. I think that barely needs cutting down at all. I think that's really great. The scene between Eumedes and Antigonus, again, was really great. And there were moments where the verse just tripped along and I was really into the storytelling. And then there were moments where I kind of got lost a little bit again, which maybe suggests that some of it is a little bit overlong. And then the philosophers, I really like that. It did follow on quite well from the previous scene, kind of structure-wise. They kind of picked up the same themes and the same imagery, the idea of that rolling ball, which they then talked about tennis balls and the moon and things, which is quite clever, quite satisfying the way that continued. But it is very, very long. But I would be kind of sad to cut it completely, because that's where good bits of comedy come from, especially when he was saying, I got offered an entire town and I said no. I just love that. That was very funny. So yeah, I wouldn't cut it completely, but yeah, cut it down.
Yeah, it's I think all of these, in a sense, none of these scenes are very few of these scenes are absolutely vital in of themselves. They're all thematically linked, but actually the plot frequently happens off stage, even in scenes that are sort of important. And so there is this sense of actually you can't cut anything in terms of scene-wise, because they're all not important, but they're all equally not important, if that makes sense. And you sort of just judge the scene in its own right, rather than how it fits together in a plot sense. The narrative is not so important to what this play is trying to do. Liza, any final thoughts?
Sorry about the noise. There's both a motorcycle revving and a shouting match going outside my window.
Those philosophers again. I mean, you just can't stop them, can you?
I know, right? Now they're like, I'm more stoical. No, I'm more stoical. Just, I don't know. I think even though the ways of dividing this play are a little arbitrary, I liked that this opened with the Roxane Olympias scene and ended with the two philosophers. I think because those are two scenes between pairs of people who don't really have the option to take up the sword themselves. So all they can do is comment on what other people are doing. And Olympias does hold some political power, but does she hold military power? I guess we'll find out. I feel like Alexander might be better at writing people commenting on things rather than he might be better at that than at trying to advance the plot.
I don't think he's interested in advancing the plot. I mean, that's the thing. It's not that he's bad at it. I don't think he's interested in it. It's sort of like, watching season 3 of Twin Peaks, as opposed to seasons 1 and 2. Lynch doesn't care about advancing the plot very much. He just wants to watch someone sweeping the floor, and that's cool. We can do that for 3-4 minutes. Nothing has to happen. It's okay. Whether that's something anyone wants to watch is entirely up to you. Desna, any final thoughts?
No, I've got really distracted by the thought of the series 3 of Twin Peaks. Yeah, I've really enjoyed all of this as well. So I really, really enjoyed Olympus and Roxane. And I am actually really loving the philosophers, and I agree that you could cut some of it, but don't cut it entirely. I think the difference between those two perspectives, that the really emotional and intimate and exchange between Olympias and Roxane contrasted with these two old guys, pontificating on the situation is really good. They also remind me slightly of Statler and Waldorf, and I can't really put my finger on why. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Excellent. Right. Well, next session we will conclude our journey through the text, not necessarily in the right order, and hopefully we will resolve where everything goes in the show notes by the time this video actually goes out, and then maybe further down the line we will read it properly in all the right order, so that we can get the proper sense of the flow of it all. If you like what we do and like to keep us in cheese, you can support our work by joining us on Patreon, / Beyond Shakespeare on Patreon. That you get bonus things on Patreon, as well as also early access to things that the real world doesn't get. You can also, if you just want to do a little one-off payment, you could buy us a coffee on Ko-fi.com / Beyond Shakespeare, or you can just follow us on Twitter at Beyond Shakes and just say nice things about us, or leave a review for what we do online on one of those podcaster things. This video goes out on YouTube, but we also have a podcast. In fact, primarily we are a podcast. This is the prep work for the stuff we do on the podcast. So you can always find the Beyond podcast on any good podcatcher out there. That's, I think, all of the basic marketing stuff that I'm sort of obliged to say these days to keep the lights on. You can also join us. There's free sign-ups. Go to beyondshakespeare.org and sign up. You can be one of us. Join us. It's entirely free, and you can just join us and read and say things. You can just sit in the room and watch while we're doing this live. You don't have to commentate. We have a chat room where you can just barrack us from, sledge us from behind the scenes with terrible, terrible thoughts. Anyway, all that remains is to thank all these wonderful readers for all their wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. His pride so great is grown that none can it endure.